My lawyers have warned me. Keep quiet. Say nothing. Don't tell this story. Fuck them. My origins are Dullsville, so I'll start after my daughter is gone and my marriage, like so many others, collapses. And my job, answering phones at a box factory, yes, this was back when people, actually women, would answer the phone. I was inexplicably let go. So I became a waitress, briefly. And then I sold knickknacks on a faux cashmere bath towel on the sidewalk. I then became a caregiver to an old woman who had transparent skin and darting eyes until she drew her last breath. Then I entered that odd netherworld, perhaps you've lived there as well, where the destruction of one's life seems to unfold like a fatal car accident in ghostly slow motion. I would walk down the center of Folsom Street, daring the cars to hit me. This is the story of how I saved myself from those lost years. Oh, come on. We all have them. And by lost years, I don't mean those anecdotes that we tell one another to entertain or connect. I mean those parts of our lives that are living on deep within us, but are truly lost because they're never, ever shared. One day, I saw near the curb on Folsom Street a small rectangle. Could it be a clipper car? Or, better yet, a credit card? I walked over slowly, nonchalantly, so as not to draw attention to my find. I pounced, and then I recoiled in horror. It was a year's pass to a yoga studio called The Changing Pose. Would you like a mat? I would. They said I could change in the restroom or sit in the meditation room. It was empty. A perfect square, sky blue, quiet, except for the sound of a fountain in the very center. And I want to make sure that you all know about it, in case you're ever downtown and you need a quiet, tranquil spot to take a moment for a cigarette. By the time I got back into the studio, the class was in session. I rolled out my mat and lay down. And as the instructor talked about the yogic virtues of humility, compassion, and acceptance, I noticed that the man on the mat next to mine had disturbing feet. And he exhaled with a high-pitched hum. I learned soon that he was popular with no one. When he started walking towards the women, they would turn away. One woman, Marietta, she was a queen bee. She always wore leopard print leggings. She would refer to him with an upper-class flair as a turd. Still, I was attracted to yoga for the same reason most people are. The props. Bolsters in black and gold, and these blocks that are both hard and soft, and blankets in bright colors that the changing pose had rechristened for maximum deliciousness. Creamsicle, burgundy, chartreuse. I noticed that some of the women would choose their blanket to match their yoga outfit. I didn't have a yoga outfit, but I have to confess that I developed a certain fancy for a plum blanket. All the others seemed shabby by comparison. Unfortunately, my nemesis also fancied the plum blanket, and we both started coming to class earlier and earlier so we could have it. I'd notice that when I had the plum blanket, he would talk louder when he was in my vicinity, or he would step on my mat, casually, as if it was nothing. One day, when the entire class was up doing handstands, he suddenly fell out of his and landed all ta-ta on the edge of my mat. I reached back and punched him in the mouth. Not hard. My hand was fine. But I noticed, as he grabbed his cheek, in the corner of his eye, a tear started to appear. Suddenly, the women were coming out of their handstands. Marietta, on her hands and knees, crawled over to him and patted his thigh. Other women walked up and took him by the hand. One woman threw her arms around him, and they watched him try not to cry. I bent down, picked up the plum blanket, put it under my arm, and left. But I couldn't help but think, surely there was something I could learn from that incident that could get me a little bit of money so that I could find a place to live. Instead, a little non-profit employment agency right here in the Tenderloin found me a job cleaning houses with two other women. Juliana, who when she wasn't cleaning, was coordinating all the volunteers at her church, and Maggie, who was the leader and was compulsive. She was the one who would tell us, get in there, scrupulously clean, and get out. I have to admit that in many ways, cleaning houses was my ideal job. I mean, when else can you just walk around someone else's house? stroke the scarf that's hanging over a doorknob, or try on someone else's shirt and shoes, or sit down at their computer and feel under your fingertips the stickiness and grit. Or examine their razor for the tiniest of hairs. I might have cleaned houses forever, except one day when I was standing in front of a mirror, juggling a pair of white gold cufflinks. Maggie entered. What are you doing? I wasn't going to take them, I said. Finish up in here, and then we'll be done with you. I thought that she might rat me out to the agency, but she didn't. Because 3 days later, they called me. They said there was a house where the owner had been called away unexpectedly and for an unspecified amount of time. Could I just go there every day and keep the dust at bay? I went and met the uniformed, armed security guard. He gave me a little card with a code on it that would unlock the door. I went inside. At the center of the house was a courtyard filled with trees, shrubs, plantings, all, I was later assured, natives. Then I walked through the house. It was cool, sleek, full of glass, metallic, like an iPhone. Was I really going to come back here every day? No. But I would pop in every few weeks and collect my check. Then I walked into the den. And there she was, on the wall, in a painting. A young girl about 11 years old, underneath a beautiful tree. In one hand, she had an iPhone. In the other hand, a popsicle. And she was wearing nothing but plain white underwear. I reached into my pocket for a lipstick that I'd pilfered from a previous gig. And I went up, and in bright red, I colored in the cleft between her legs. I'd made my mark. And so I decided to stay that night. A second night. A third night. until I felt the presence of a man looming over me. Do you think it's erotic, he asked. Shh. We stared at the painting together in silence until he couldn't take it anymore. And he said, "What are you doing here?" "I live here," I said. "Who invited you?" he asked me. "Who do you think?" "You know," he said, "people see my house as like a lab during the golden age of alchemy." I mean, but that's because, they overestimate me. I'm a simple guy. And I realized I'd seen his face before in the society pages of the newspaper, charity events. I can only do one thing well, kind of like Johnny Appleseed, he said. I sow innovation. You're the guy who bought that building downtown and turned it into a porno studio. Rory, he said. You charge people money to watch other people having sex. How incredibly innovative. $40 million, he said. It's a lot of innovation. But she's content just with that tree, I said. What is that? He said. And we both walked to get a closer look at the painting. I finally decided I should fill him in. She's menstruating, I said. Not on my wall. Oh yes, that spot will be there, I don't know, a few more days. And then, for a few weeks, it'll be gone. And then it'll be back again. Just like the moon. Some guy had her, he said. She's been deflowered. And you see, she's bragging to all her friends, texting. She's a goddess, I said. She uses that cell phone to send out all spiritual knowledge to humankind. And she uses the popsicle to devour all human experience. I paid for that painting. I know the artist, Jay Young. She's been had. Call him up, I said. You girls. You're always the most sexist. Jay Young, female. Call her up, I said. I have a lot of questions about this painting. And so, as we waited for Jay Young to appear, I convinced him to help me take the painting off the wall. It wasn't easy, but we put it down on the floor and we were both staring at it as we heard the click, clack, click of Jay Young's high heels coming up the stairs. Oh my goodness, Jay said, what happened? We have a controversy, Jay, and only you can solve it. I love this painting, I said. Every time I look at her, I see a new universe. Tell me everything about it. Well, Jay said, it's 6 feet by 8 feet. And the colors, I picked them to match the decor of the room. Oh, it looks so good with the chandelier. Is that menstrual blood, Jay? Because if it is, I want my money back. I'll paint over it, she said. It's not yours to paint. This painting belongs to the world. And I think the whole thing begins in that spot. That glorious red. I mean, that's like the beginning of all human consciousness. All human art. She's right, Rory, Jay said, and she threw her arm around my shoulder in a form of aesthetic solidarity. As if touching me would somehow keep her convinced of the painting's worth. Rory looked at his painting, and then he looked at us, and then he looked back at the painting, and then he gripped himself around the middle as if he was trying literally to hold himself together. But he couldn't. And he started to cry. Jay gasped and walked over to him. She put her hands on his shoulders. She gave him a kiss. And she pulled him down onto the painting. And they began to make love. It occurred to me that it might be an appropriate time for me to leave. I mean, let's face it, there are few things as tedious as watching other people have sex. But beneath their limbs, I could still see the girl. A bent knee, a hunched shoulder, her wide-eyed gaze. I decided to stay. So I sat, staring at the wall where the painting had once hung. Until I felt the sun on my back, and I realized that the sound that I had thought was the sound of the ocean was actually Rory snoring. Jay got up on one elbow. "What are you doing here?" she said. "I live here," I said. And she got up. I noticed that she had a little streak of lipstick on her skirt. She asked me, "Are you his keeper, his minder? Because if you are, you deserve a medal. I mean, what you've done for Rory. I've always found him, well, repulsive, but last night he was attractive, sexy even. What about the painting?" I asked her. "That piece of shit," she said. "Can you keep a secret?" "I'm an artist. And asked me, could I paint a picture of a little girl in her underwear. Don't look at me like that. You know, I'm an artist. If you wave money under my nose, I'm not going to say no. But I'm a busy little bee. And my true passion is not really painting. It's designing fitness wearables. You know, those little bracelets that record every step you take, or the necklaces that record every beat of your heart. But I have a friend, another painter, and he's always living on the edge. So I asked him if he would do the painting for $10,000. The commission was for $50,000. It's my spiritual path. I always make a win-win. And she kissed me on both cheeks and then walked out of the den. I stared up at the chandelier and all around the room as I waited. And finally, Rory stirred. "What are you doing here?" he said. "I have a favor to ask you." And I could see cynicism flutter across his eyes. But then his face folded back into a smile. "Sure," he said. "Help me put the painting back on the wall." And I offered him my hand so he could stand up and pull up his pants. And then the two of us put the painting back. She was resilient, hardly worse for the wear. I curled up on the couch, and Rory looked around the room. "Comfy?" he asked me. The den in Rory's house became my perch. I was mostly undisturbed, except almost once a day, a woman would peek through the door and then push it open and make a circle around the room, saying nothing. She was like a poodle marking her territory by pissing in every corner. I found out from the security guard, Mr. Jennings, that she was Serena, Rory's favorite, and a megastar in the world of adult entertainment. But what I could never figure out was she Rory's spy? One morning when I woke up, Rory was seated at the end of the couch where I slept, his legs crossed, his hands on his knees like a guru. "I don't believe in much," he said, "but I believe in dreams. I had a dream last night. Let's figure it out together. Comfy?" I was searching for the ocean, but all I could find was an empty sea floor. I was about to walk across it, but I realized it was covered with insects with bright green wings that fluttered and hummed. I couldn't move, so I listened. And it began to dawn on me. These insects need so little, we don't even notice when they've taken over. when they're here to stay. His message was obvious. He wanted me out. Rory, I had a dream last night too. It was very similar. I was on the bottom of the ocean, but it was covered with roses, green and ivory colored. I lay back on them, but they were crinkly and stiff. They were paper roses made out of money. And when I closed my eyes, I slept like a baby. That's not like my dream. And in a single well-rehearsed move, he got up off of the couch and left the den. That night, in what had become a ritual, I waved goodbye to Mr. Jennings, the security guard. And when I would return, he would always offer me a toffee, a kind of secret handshake, a covenant of mutual understanding. For me, Bart runs faster at night because those who have partners and plans head for the door, and the rest of us sink back into the seats that smell of plastic, pee, and Colt 45. That night, there was a woman sitting across the aisle from me, and there was a man sitting across from her. She was letting him have it. You don't answer my texts. You don't answer my calls. You insult my mother. You ass-kiss my father, but he is on to you. Hey, hey, hey. I already dumped you. You banged my sister. That proves it. We're splits. She said that the night she spent in bed with you was the most boring of her life. She is still yawning. And right then the car came to a stop and the man almost tumbled over to the woman, but she leapt out of the way and ran out of the train. Hey, 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 he yelled after her. I dumped you first. The woman who was sitting next to me rolled her eyes and made a face of disgust. The man sat shaking his head, sighed a few times, and then he put his hands over his eyes. He had dark, dark hair and red cheeks and kind of lumpy posture that evokes long nights playing video games and hitting a bomb. But when he took his hands down from his eyes, his fingers were wet, and he was crying. Oh, said the woman next to me, and she leaned in closer. Oh, she said again, and she put her hand over her mouth. The driver announced the next stop. She stood up and rifled through her backpack and pulled out a crumpled bill. She walked over to him and put it in his hand. And then she leaned down and whispered something in his ear. Then she ran off the train so as not to miss her stop. And the man cried for another 2 minutes until he finally opened his fist and saw the $20 bill. People are giving me bucks like I'm a bum. May I ask what she said to you? I like it. That's what she said, just like that. I like it. Well, it doesn't sound like she thinks you're a bum. Well, I am. I used to live with my girlfriend. Now I don't even have a home. So I decided I would invite him to come with me back to Rory's. He told me that his name was Kyle and that he was a part-time gardener and a veteran of the Battle of Fallujah. When we got to Rory's place, Mr. Jennings offered us both a toffee. And if Rory noticed the new arrival, he certainly didn't let on. A week later, Serena made her perambulation around the den. And she spoke for the very first time. This is my sanctuary. This is my haven. It's time for you and your pathetic sidekick to go. I leaned back, and Kyle started shaking his head. I will not tiptoe around, Serena said, while you two make yourselves at home. It is time for you both to make like the dawn and fade. Hey, 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 Kyle said. Kick someone in the teeth and pretend it's poetry. Pick him up, Serena said, and carry him out. I have to admit that I found Serena's obliviousness to Kyle's tears incredibly refreshing. I mean, after all the women's reactions to the yoga guy, Rory, Kyle on Bart, to Serena, Kyle's tears were like lint to sweep off her shoulder. Don't, she said to Kyle, don't make me call Mr. Jennings. And she stared at Kyle like she was trying to get him into focus, like he was a specimen, and she had seen hundreds and hundreds of them. But this was a bug. That was a new mutation. She moved closer and closer to him until They were literally eye to eye. He was trying to choke back his tears, but he couldn't. And she sank to the floor. He started to cough. She reached her hand forward to pat his back, but then said, "Do you mind if I touch?" And he shook his head no. And she dropped her hand. And so she sat and watched him cry. And as he cried, he began to speak. When I was little, I was so lonesome whenever the ducks would start flying south for the winter. But I never really looked at the ducks, except in cartoons. And Serena sat, rocking back and forth, and watching Kyle, and listening to Kyle, until he said, "That's it," and pulled out his phone. She stood up, wild-eyed, and called Rory's name, and then she came over to me. You know about this. That was, Rory threw open the door. "What's the matter?" "It's Kyle," she said. And she was about to go and touch him, but she remembered the prohibition against touch. So instead, she kissed Rory. And when the kiss was done, he walked over to Kyle. "Hey, man, glad to know you. I thank you for whatever you did for Serena." And Kyle put his earbuds in his ear. "Oh my God," Serena said. "I've always hated that painting. But now I realize I'm her." That night, it snowed. I could see it in the courtyard. I opened the window and stuck my hand out, and I felt floating ash. And I heard laughter below. And I saw through the trees a figure and a circle of flames. I watched until the fire went out. The next morning, Serena was leaning over me. I could smell the smoke in her hair. "Your fire?" I asked her. "I gathered up all my clothes," she said, "and I carried them out into the courtyard, and I put them in a big pile, and then I took out a match, and I struck it, and then I put it on the ruffle of my nylon dress. Whoosh!" I stripped it off so fast, and I threw it on the other clothes. And I watched them burn. Now, I'm just me. I did invite some of my friends over this afternoon to see Kyle cry. And there's someone else I want to share it with. Someone who said they didn't want to ever talk to me again. Hold my hand. Hold my hand. Surprise. Mom? In those first days, Serena's friends came every afternoon and Kyle would cry for them. There were a few women who were bored or bemused, but most came back again and again, and they told their friends. I needed more men. So I found Danson. He was the delivery guy. And he had once told me that he got all bleary-eyed when he listened to the music of Tupac Shakur. And then there was Lang, former priest, and Miguel, and Sidney. Some days I would have 5 different men on 5 different floors of the house, all weeping. Serena's mother loved all the men. They're fearless, she said. But Mom, Serena asked, is this a healing? Or is it a spiritual path? Honey, it can't be a religion. No one's asked me for money. I don't ask, I said, until you're ready. I'm ready, Serena said. Are you? The first time she tried to give me money, she gave me a wad of bills as big as Kyle's fist, and I gave it back to her. The second time, she Venmo'd me a lot of money with the comment, "This is my time." I told her she should get cash and bury it in the courtyard. The third time she got me money, I told her she was ready. And her task was to find the other women who were ready. And she should ask them for money. And they should take half of it and bury it in the courtyard. And bring the other half to me. Now, some women didn't want to tithe because they figured they could find this power elsewhere. Ex-boyfriends, fantasy, Netflix. But most were soon disillusioned and came back to the fold. And I kept recruiting men. I hope Serena told you, Rory said, we're closing the house. She and I have a project shoot in the Maldives. We're leaving tonight. Danson was doing a tarot reading for Kyle. He was laying out the cards. He said brightly, one door closes, another opens. And Serena said, I'm not going. Honey, Rory said, you're the project. He always flatters me, she said, when he wants something. I will never abandon the tears for the shoot. Rory looked at me. His eyes said, be an ally. I said nothing. You know, honey, I think the tears thing, I think it's radical, Rory said. I mean, it's potent. It's visionary, but the shoot, it's our calling. I mean, we do porn to help other people. It's our work. I no longer work, Serena said. I no longer relax. I change women's lives. You can go on the shoot, I said. Don't worry about me. See, Rory said. I mean, this is gonna be fun. It's gonna be great. Come on. And if we postpone, a lot of weird money shit will go down. Weird money shit? Kyle said. Nobody uses words like that unless they're a threat. I don't make threats. Rory said. I state facts. And the fact is, Serena, you're a brilliant actress, the most brilliant actress I've ever worked with. You know that. Flatter, flatter, Serena said. Phony, phony, phony. It's true, Rory said to me. She's a brilliant actress, but you know, actors, they're mercurial. But Serena and I, we're a team. We don't even have a contract, just our word. My word, Serena said, is go fuck yourself. Rory pulled out his phone and pounded out a text, and then he swept the tarot reading onto the floor. Hey, 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 Kyle said, that's my destiny. Danson saw one card still on the table. He looked at it, and then he held it up. This is your life, Rory. It's the tower. Reversed. See, your basement's on fire, and there are all these little men flying up into your attic. It's either that or the old limp dangle. Right then, Mr. Jennings walked in, gun drawn. Get out, Rory said, all of you, and you too, Serena. If you can't stand the flattery, the fun, the money, go. Serena smiled and walked over to me. She gave a big grin to Kyle and Danson. She smiled wanly at Mr. Jennings' gun. And then she looked over at Rory, who stared back at her. She dropped her eyes. And then, very quickly, she walked back to his side. Mr. Jennings marched the rest of us out. And then he stopped in every bedroom and gathered up 22 other men. You are not welcome in this house, he told us. And the men trudged out into the dark. I wouldn't budge. So he pointed the gun at my head. Let me tell you 3 things, he said. First, Rory will not tolerate any of you in this house. Second, in 15 minutes, I go get the limo, and I'll be back within the hour to take Rory and Serena to the airport. And Rory has ordered me to change every lock in the house. Go. And he reached out his hand, and in it was a card with a bunch of numbers on it. You didn't get this from me, he said. Serena was standing in the far corner of the den. By her side were a few compact pieces of luggage. Heading out, I said. you came back. Rory's been my life. I mean, all this, it's just so new. When I get back, we can regroup. Dig up the money, I said. And she put her hand over her mouth and then took it down. I already did. For you. And she unzipped a small carry-on bag and showed it to me. Now, I didn't believe that she dug up the money for me. But as I ran my fingers through all those bills, I mean, sure, we had all those satisfied women with their bright cheeks, and we had all those men who would spend themselves crying for free. Stroking that money was like reaching into a beehive and then pulling out your hand, unstung, sticky with honey, celebrating the sweetness of all your efforts. What's she doing here? Rory said. I took the bag and tossed it back to the couch. I'm not going, Serena said. Oh, stop, Rory said. We decided. I decide, Serena said. I'm done here. And she pulled out a pistol. And she pointed it at Rory and at me. And he gave me a thin little smile, like there was something marvelous in that moment, that she was using a weapon to point at both of us, and we must be allies. The money, she said, looking at me, it's my freedom. And she reached down to grab that bag, and he reached for the gun. And they started to wrestle, struggling back and forth, and right as the door opened, the gun flew up over our heads, and it was seized out of the air by a small woman with straight bangs and braces who was standing next to Mr. Jennings. My name's Maud. Today I'm 40. My friend said we should come here to celebrate. And she glanced back at a cluster of women who were in the doorway, and behind them were my guys. I had no idea what to expect. And she pointed the gun and pulled the trigger. I don't remember hearing the gun, the bullet hit the chandelier. But I did hear it teeter and crack and then collapse, hitting Rory, who staggered and crumpled to the floor. Is he all right? One of the women asked. And Kyle ran forward and grabbed his wrist. Hey, hey, hey! There's no pulse. I love the guy. He took me in when no one else would. His house was even bigger than his heart. And the women began to move forward to watch Kyle cry. Mr. Jennings said, look, we We can bury Rory in the courtyard. And then help carry the body out. Maud came up to me. This is the most intense birthday I have ever had. It was at her insistence that we renamed the den after Rory. Serena still holds salons there and on every floor of the house. I moved the painting up to the master bedroom. Those sheets, silky as tears. And the bed, so huge, feels like the whole world.